Start. Assalamu alaikum, guys. I hope that you all are fine and enthusiastic and energetic to learn the explanation of the third poem that we started a couple of days ago. So here we are discussing Samson Agonistes by John Milton. What was the story? What was the story and how John Milton has defined this poem? What happened with the Samson? Today we will be discussing all these things explained and described by John Milton. So first of all, let me tell you the meaning of agonist, why John Milton has used this word for Samson. Basically, agonist means wrestler, or you may call it athlete. As he was, or as he had immense power, physically he was so strong. That's why John Milton has John Milton has used this term, that is Samson Agonist. Samson was his name, and agonist means a wrestler or athlete. And we all know that wrestlers usually have strong and immense power. Physically they are so strong that a common man cannot defeat them or face them. So the agenda of our talk would be like this. First of all, critical appreciation, as we all are familiar. Then we will be talking about somehow the brief introduction about John Milton, about the poet, then the background of the poem, and then form and style of the poem, that in which form this poem has been used, and what is the style of composing this poem. Okay, there are certain styles of composing this poetry, form and style. Okay, so this is the agenda of our talk today. You may call it contents, that we will be defining elements of verse. As it is a piece of verse, how and what sort of elements John Milton has used in his poem. Okay, verse. Then finally we would try to conclude our discussion, that what will be the theme. Okay, conclusion, or you may call it theme of the poem. So let me begin our session with critical appreciation, introduction to the poet. I told you in first lecture about something about John Milton, that who he was and how he got reputation and name and fame. So John Milton was born in 1608, and remember that he was born in London. Okay, so John Milton was born in 1608 in London, and he was died on 8th November 1674. Okay, remember his date of birth as well as date of death, because maybe it will help you in solving these MCQs. So John Milton is a shining star of the horizon of English literature. There is no denying of this fact, that indeed he was a great poet, a shining star of English literature. Okay, he has composed this poem though he was blind. Now there is a line that he was blind, but how we can come to know that how he lost his eyesight? Basically, John Milton was not a blind by birth. Rather, he was so keen of reading work of literature, so that's why he lost his eyesight in 1652. Remember the date. John Milton lost his eyesight in 1652. Sorry. Okay, lost his eyesight. नजर खो गई थी इसकी. That's why he became blind. Okay, so John Milton lost his eyesight in 1652, and though he was a blind, yet he reached the heights of greatness. There is something that we need to understand, that why and how he was able to achieve his highness, his reputation, and his name and fame only because of his strong commitment, okay, and dedication to his work. Although he lost vision, यानी अगर एक बंदा अपना विजन नजर ही खो बैठे, but still he was able to compose his poetries, and to do so or to complete his remaining works, who helped him? His daughters helped him to compose his poetry or even other works in literature. So this is a really great information that I have shared with you, because it is really important to know all aspects of John Milton. So he was a great moralist. I told you in the first lecture that rather he was interested to compose or to work for morality. Okay, that's why we call him that he was a great moralist. With lofty ideas, he had really wonderful ideas of morality, values, ethics. So he was a great scholar of classical as well as Hebrew literature, both English literature as well as Hebrew literature. So this is an autobiographical poem of John Milton. Why we call it autobiographical poem? Because as he was himself blind, he has showed this character Samson Agonistes, and Samson was also blind in this poem. Okay, so in comparison, or when we compare this sort of characteristic of the poet, then we would say that yes, it is a autobiographical poem. So the second thing that we have, okay, poet, we have done this. Okay, the second thing that we have to discuss, that is the background of the poem. In which background John Milton has composed this poem? What was the background or background setting for this poem? Basically, these lines have been taken from a tragic play. Tragic play, Samson Agonistes. Remember this, that indeed poet was a blind, although that he has shown in his play or in his poem, he was also blind. Okay, he was not blind before, but he was made blind by his enemies, Palestinians, when they made him captive. Okay, then he sets the story in imitation of Greek tragedy. ग्रीक ट्रेजेडी को इसने कॉपी करते हुए इंग्लिश लिटरेचर में इस ट्रेजेडी को बयान किया है. ओके, इमिटेशन मीन्स कॉपी. Imitation of the Greek tragedy. Then Hebrew legend. Okay, he tells us about an ancient Hebrew legend of Samson. Yes, he has told about Samson. So the mighty champion of Israel, Samson, before becoming prisoner, he was known as a champion, a hero, okay, of Israel community. The mighty champion of Israel, now blind, working as a slave of Palestinian. When Palestinian made him captive, he became slave of those enemies. Okay, क्योंकि उसको बांदी बना लिया गया था, कैद कर लिया गया था, तो जाहिर सी बात है अब सामसन वैसा सामसन नहीं रहा था, अब उसको गुलाम करके रखा गया था पैलेस्टीनियन की जानिब से. He was made captive through the treachery of his wife. The only reason of his becoming prisoner was disloyalty of his wife. उसकी वाइफ जो थी वो disloyal बन गई थी, उसने धोखा किया था Samson Agonistes से. That's why he was made captive by his enemies through the treachery of his wife. Otherwise, they had no any other chance to make Samson as captive or as a prisoner. Okay, so that's why they made a plan and they used his wife in order to catch Samson. Okay, once the Palestinians wanted to show Samson's strength, एक मर्तबा यानी जब उन्होंने एक जहन बना लिया कि now we want to see the immense power of Samson, and in order to do so they made him captive. अब उसकी यानी ताकत के करतब देखना चाहते थे तो उन्होंने उसको कैदी बना लिया. So once the Palestinians wanted to show Samson's strength, for that they invited the cream of their generation. पूरी कम्युनिटी को उन्होंने वहां पे इकट्ठा किया एक टेम्पल के नीचे. Why? Because they all were eager to see the immense power and tricks, made by or performed by Samson Agonistes. So this is really a fantastic line that for that they invited the cream of their generation. They gathered under the roof of a temple. As I have told you, मैंने पहले भी बता दिया था आप लोगों को कि एक जगह एक टेम्पल के नीचे इकट्ठा होते हैं in order to celebrate their feasts, in order to celebrate their festivities. They invited every respected people or respected leader of their community only to see different tricks performed by Samson Agonistes. And they one by one ordered Samson that do this one, and Samson was compelled to do so. Why? Because he was in their custody. Okay, so for that they invited the cream of their generation. They gathered under the roof of a temple, and Samson was brought there to entertain them with the feats of his strength. Yes, this was the basic purpose of making Samson as captive, or as a prisoner. They all wanted to be entertained by Samson. Okay, Samson की करतब देखने के बाद वो entertain होना चाहते थे, पुरलुत्फ होना चाहते थे, मजा देखना चाहते थे. And as we have discussed, that Samson had a great strength and immense power, so that's why he was able to perform everything in front of his enemies. So the third thing that we have to do, we have to discuss, that is form and style. This was the background. Okay, कि ये background था जिसमें ये poem लिखी गई है. Okay, you may also call it setting, prior setting of the poem. Okay, before writing this poem, John Milton had this sort of setting. Okay, form and style of the poem, in which form he has composed and what sort of literal or style he has, you may call, applied in his poem. So, Samson Agonistes is a poetic drama. Number one, you may call it, this is the form of this poem. It is a poetic drama. Okay, when we say form and style, it means we are concerned with, because there are number of forms. एलिजी में भी poems लिखी जाती हैं, sonnet में भी लिखे जाते हैं. Okay, और साथ ही साथ poetic dramas में भी लिखे जाते हैं, comedy में भी लिखे जाते हैं, tragedy में भी लिखे जाते हैं. Of course, this is a tragic piece of drama, but it is in a poetic form of the drama. So John Milton has done this. Samson Agonistes is a poetic drama. Number one thing that is really important, it is Milton's supreme skill and masterly control. अब ये जॉन मिल्टन का एक निहायत ही आप कह सकते हैं कि डिस्टिंक्ट स्टाइल है, एक यूनिक स्टाइल है कि उसने इस चीज को पोएटिक फॉर्म में, पोएटिक ड्रामा की फॉर्म में जो है वो कंपोज कर दिया है. सो कंट्रोल दैट द ड्रामा डिपिक्ट्स. अब ड्रामा हमें शो क्या करता है, जाहिर क्या करता है. अब इसमें से हमें पता क्या चलता है कि हाउ ही हैज शोन और हाउ ही हैज एक्सप्लेन्ड. द ड्रामा डिपिक्ट्स द फ्लो एंड टच ऑफ लिरिकल पोएट्री. साथ ही साथ उसमें पोएट्री का भी टच दे दिया है, लिरिकल पोएट्री. ओके, and it was not an easy task for John Milton, and of course it is not an easy task for a common man to compose such a masterly piece of literature in easy form of you may call writing. So Samson Agonistes is a poetic drama. It is Milton's supreme skill and masterly control that the drama depicts the flow and touch of lyrical poetry. The poem is composed in blank verse. Remember this. This is the style of the poem. That this poem is written in a blank verse. Okay? In blank verse. What we call blank verse. Okay? You all have idea before this. So the poem is composed in a blank verse. The style at once attracts the readers. एक ही लम्हे में, एक ही रीडिंग में, दिस पीस ऑफ पोएटिक ड्रामा हैज characteristics features that it will attract readers. ये पढ़ने वालों को अपनी जानिब मायल कर लेता है, मायल कर लेती है. ओके, यानी एक ऐसा पीस ऑफ राइटिंग है जो कि आपको इंटरेस्टिंग भी लगेगा और साथ ही साथ यानी ट्रेजिक भी लगेगा. और यू वुड फाइंड नंबर ऑफ इंसिडेंट्स इन इट. ओके, डिफरेंट इंसिडेंट्स के कैसे यानी सैमसन को पकड़ा गया, सैमसन को जो है वो डिफरेंट करतब दिखाने के लिए कहा गया. एंड देन हाउ ही पुट दैट डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑन हिज एनिमीज, कैसे वो यानी वो जो मैसी पिलर्स होते हैं उनको गिरा देता है. सो ऑल दीज थिंग्स हैव बीन डिफाइंड इन दिस पोएम. Then the second another thing that we have, that is elements of verse. Okay, what are the elements of this poetic verse? इन लाइनों में शायर ने कौन कौन से एलिमेंट्स शायरी के इस्तेमाल किए हैं? मिल्टन इज अ रिकॉग्नाइज्ड मास्टर ऑफ सिमिलीज एंड मेटाफर्स. ओके, अब आप इनको यूं भी कह सकते हैं कि what sort of figures of speech he has used, similes and metaphors. Similes and metaphors आपने पहले भी पढ़े हैं, सेकंड पोएम में भी पढ़े हैं. ओके, फर्स्ट पोएम में शेक्सपियर ने भी इस्तेमाल किए हैं, थॉमस कैम्पेन ने अपनी पोएम में द लाइफ ऑफ मैन अपराइट में इस्तेमाल किए हैं. वहाँ पे भी आपने पढ़े हुए हैं कि मेटाफर क्या होता है, सिमिली क्या होता है. ओके, आई थिंक एंड आई होप दैट यू ऑल हैव आइडिया अबाउट दीज टू फिगर्स ऑफ स्पीच. इनको एलिमेंट्स ऑफ वर्स भी कहा जाता है. ओके, क्योंकि ये चीज़ें फिगर्स ऑफ स्पीच आर फिगुरेटिव लैंग्वेज. इन अदर वर्ड्स यू मे आल्सो कॉल इट फिगुरेटिव लैंग्वेज. इनको ये भी कहा जा सकता है बिकॉज एक होती है सिंपल लैंग्वेज, एक होती है लिटरेचर की लैंग्वेज या फिगुरेटिव लैंग्वेज जो कि आम बंदे की समझ से दूर होती है. अनटिल एंड अनलेस यू आर making analysis of it and going through different examples of it, you would be able to understand the figurative language used by different writers and poets. Okay, so there are different names: figurative language, figures of speech जिनको कहा जाता है, and elements of verse कि शायर ने कौन कौन सी वो figures of speech है, figurative language है जो अपनी पोइट्री में इस्तेमाल किए हैं, कि किस तरह के मिसाल कोट किए हैं. ओके, फर्ज करें कि हम कहते हैं कि यू आर एज ब्रेव एज लायन. ओके, अब ये क्या हुआ, ये हम मेटाफर के तौर पे इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं कि हम सिर्फ और सिर्फ एक चीज को दूसरे ऑब्जेक्ट के साथ कंपेयर कर रहे हैं. ओके, सो दिस इज अ काइंड ऑफ एलिमेंट ऑफ वर्स दैट मिल्टन हैज यूज्ड. एंड रिमेंबर दैट जॉन मिल्टन वाज known as, or he is famous as, master of using these similes and metaphors. So Milton is a recognized master of similes and metaphors. Similes like as with the force of wind and water paint. Last में you would find this one. Metaphors जो उसने इस्तेमाल किए हैं, जिसमें उसने हवाओं का, समंदर की लहरों का मिसाल दिया है कि ऐसी ताकत थी यानी सैमसन की जो यानी स्ट्रेंथ थी, जो इमेंस ताकत थी, उसको उसने वाटर पेंट के साथ और विंड्स के साथ जो है, विंड्स के साथ यानी कंपेयर किया है, तूफानों के साथ, तुगयानी के साथ उसने कंपेयर किया है. सो दिस इज कॉल्ड मेटाफर. सो एज विद द फोर्स ऑफ विंड्स एंड वाटर पेंट एंड मेटाफर लाइक, सॉरी वो सिमिली इस्तेमाल किए इसने, दिस वाज अ mistake. So as with the force of winds and water is a simile used by John Milton, and the metaphor like flower are enough to prove Milton's capability of using poetic skill. अब flower यहाँ पे फूल की माने नहीं है, rather it meant by all those highly reputable personalities of Palestinians, prestigious personalities of Palestinians who were gathered under the temple. वो सारे जो लीडर्स आए थे, जिसमें यानी आप कह सकते हैं कि यानी उनके पादरी भी थे, प्रीस्ट भी थे, और साथ ही साथ बड़े बड़े नाम, दिग्गज नाम भी थे. ओके, तो जाने पहचाने नामवर लोगों को उन्होंने अपनी फेस्टिविटीज मनाने के लिए जब बुलाया था, तो उन लोगों के लिए John Milton has used this metaphor. Okay, so उनको कंपेयर करते हुए उसने ये मेटाफर इस्तेमाल किया कि आम लोग नहीं थे, यानी सब के सब वहां पे इकट्ठा हुए थे. So the last thing that we have to discuss, that is the conclusion of this poem, how to conclude this poem and what we have gained from this poem. If someone is asking you to define or to compose or even to write the theme of this poem, then what sort of things you have that you may read, you may write in your conclusion. Okay, so this poem is the most personal of Milton's poem. सबसे पहले आपको चीज ये याद रखनी है कि this poem belongs or considered as one of the personal poems or personal, you may call it, piece of poetry which belongs to only to John Milton. Why? Because this is an autobiographical poem. वो खुद अंधा बन चुका था in 1652. सैमसन को उसने अंधा यानी जाहिर किया है. So this was rather a story was completely related with John Milton. Similarities थी, इसलिए हम उसको कह सकते हैं कि ये personal piece of poem है. So he identifies much of himself with biblical hero. Okay, biblical hero Samson को उसने इसमें यानी जो है वो एक्सप्लेन किया है, शो किया है. He suggests that, अब उसने क्या सजेस्ट किया है, इस पोएम में क्या सजेशंस दी गई है या क्या बताया गया है हमें, that it is better to die than to live a miserable life in captivity. The major theme of this poem, or you may call it a fantastic conclusion of this poem, is in just one line कि भाई इससे बेहतर है कि आप मर जाएं, खत्म हो जाएं, बजाय इसके कि आप कैप्टिविटी की जिंदगी गुजारें या कैद में जिंदगी गुजारें, स्लेव, जस्ट लाइक अ स्लेव जिंदगी गुजारें. इससे कहीं गुना बेहतर है कि यू मे डाई, आप मर जाएं, खत्म हो जाएं, बट नेवर टू रिमेन अ स्लेव, ओके, इन फ्रंट ऑफ योर एनिमीज. दिस इज अ पीस ऑफ कंक्लूजन. द अदर आइडिया which is conveyed is that, अब दूसरी बात क्या बताई गई है इस पोएम में, वो ये है that one must always be ready to sacrifice one's life for the cause of one's country and race. Of course, दूसरी जो, देखिए हर चीज़ों के मुख्तलिफ पहलू होते हैं. एक पहलू था सैमसन की कैप्टिविटी का, गुलामी का. दूसरा पहलू शायर ने बताया कि जनाब वो ये है कि हमेशा एक इंडिविजुअल को, एक आम बंदे को, एक आम शहरी को अपनी तैयारी में रहना चाहिए, हमेशा अपनी जान का नजराना देने के लिए तैयार रहना चाहिए, इन ऑर्डर टू सेव हिज कम्युनिटी एंड रेस. अगर आपकी अपनी नस्ल पे बात आ जाए, अगर आपकी अपनी कम्युनिटी पे बात आ जाए और वो खतरे में हो या दुश्मनों के लपेट में हो, तो यू मे सेक्रीफाइस योर ओन लाइफ इन ऑर्डर टू प्रोटेक्ट देम, इन ऑर्डर टू डिफेंड देम. This was a conclusion that we have shared and discussed. I hope that you all have got the idea, and I will see you in next lecture with the next poem. Until then, thank you so much. Allah bless you all.